Millionaire tries to embarrass the maid's son by making him play the violin at dinner, not knowing he was a genius. Drop your location in the comments before the story starts. Your support means the world to us. The morning rain drummed against the windows of the Thornton mansion like tiny fingers tapping an urgent rhythm. 8-year-old Noah pressed his small face against the cold glass of the service entrance, watching droplets race down the pristine surface. He shouldn't be here. Not in this world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers that seemed to stretch endlessly above his head. "Stay close to me, sweetheart," his mother Eliza whispered, adjusting her worn apron with nervous fingers. "Mrs. Patterson called in sick and I couldn't find anyone to watch you. The school emergency meeting ran late and..." Her voice trailed off as footsteps echoed through the grand hallway. Noah had never seen anything like Maxwell Thornton's mansion. Every surface gleamed. Every corner held something beautiful and untouchable. His mother worked here 3 days, a week, but Noah had only heard stories. Now walking through these halls, he felt like he was in a museum where everything whispered, "Don't touch." His curiosity got the better of him. While Eliza hurried to the kitchen to begin preparations for tonight's important dinner party, Noah found himself drawn to a partially open door. Through the crack, he glimpsed something that made his heart skip, a violin sitting on an elegant stand near a massive oak desk. The instrument seemed to call to him. Noah knew he shouldn't, but his feet moved forward anyway. The violin was more beautiful than any he'd ever seen, its wood gleaming like honey in the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. He reached out, barely touching the strings, when a deep voice thundered behind him. "What are you doing in my study?" Maxwell Thornton stood in the doorway, his sharp suit and steely eyes making him look like a character from one of Noah's nightmares. At 35, Maxwell commanded attention wherever he went, and right now, that attention was focused entirely on the small boy who dared enter his private sanctuary. I was just looking," Noah stammered, stepping back from the violin. Maxwell's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Just looking?" He stepped closer and Noah could smell expensive cologne mixed with something colder. "Do you know how much that instrument costs, boy? More than your mother makes in 5 years. The cruelty in Maxwell's voice made Noah's stomach twist, but something else flickered in the wealthy man's eyes. Something that looked almost like amusement. "Tell me," Maxwell said, circling Noah like a predator. "Can you play?" Noah's throat felt dry. "A little," he whispered. Maxwell's grin widened, and Noah suddenly understood that he had just made a terrible mistake. The man's eyes gleamed with an idea that would change everything, though neither of them knew it yet. "Perfect," Maxwell heard. "Absolutely perfect." The weight of Maxwell's words hung in the air as Noah hurried back to find his mother, but as he walked through the mansion's corridors, memories flooded his mind. Memories of a very different world than these marble halls. Just 3 months ago, Noah had knelt beside a hospital bed, holding the weathered hand of his grandfather, Samuel. The old man's fingers, once nimble on violin strings, trembled as he pressed something small and worn into Noah's palm. "This was your daddy's," Samuel had whispered, his voice barely audible above the beeping machines. It was a small silver pick, tarnished with age. "He used to say, 'Music lives in our blood, Noah. Don't let anyone tell you different.'" Samuel Carter had been a violinist of extraordinary talent, but the world of the 1960s hadn't been ready for a black musician in prestigious concert halls. He'd played in small jazz clubs, in church basements, anywhere that would have him. The discrimination had broken his dreams, but never his spirit. "Your granddaddy was the finest musician I ever knew," Eliza had told Noah after the funeral, tears streaming down her face as she packed Samuel's belongings. "He said the music skipped me entirely and went straight to you." Now, in their tiny apartment, just a small room behind Mrs. Chen's laundromat, Noah practiced every morning before school. The violin Samuel had left him was old and scarred, held together with tape in places. But when Noah drew the bow across its strings, magic happened. Eliza worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. Early mornings at the bakery, afternoons cleaning, the Thornton mansion, evenings waitressing at Murphy's Diner. Her heart condition made every day a struggle, but she never complained. Not when the medical bills piled up. Not when Noah's father had died in that construction accident 2 years ago, leaving them with nothing but memories and debt. "Mama works so hard," Noah whispered to his grandfather's photograph each morning, positioning it carefully on the windowsill where the light caught Samuel's proud smile. "I'm going to make you both proud someday." He'd been teaching himself using library books and free online videos, practicing scales until his fingertips bled. Mrs. Chen sometimes complained about the noise, but she'd grown fond of the serious little boy who helped her fold laundry in exchange for a quiet practice space. Noah remembered the day he'd finally mastered his grandfather's favorite piece, Massenet's Meditation. He'd played it perfectly, tears streaming down his face, feeling as though Samuel was there in the room with him. But that was their secret world. Here, in Maxwell Thornton's mansion, Noah felt the crushing weight of how different their lives were. His mother moved through these halls like a ghost, invisible to the wealthy family that lived here. "Noah?" Eliza's voice called from the kitchen, worry threading through her words. "Where are you, sweetheart?" He found her frantically preparing canapes for tonight's dinner party, her movements sharp with anxiety. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and Noah noticed her hands shaking slightly as she arranged delicate pastries on silver trays. "I'm sorry I wandered off, Mama," Noah said, slipping his small hand into hers. Eliza squeezed gently, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's okay, baby. Just stay close. This dinner is very important to Mr. Thornton. Important people are coming." Noah nodded, but his mind was still on that beautiful violin in Maxwell's study, and the way the man's eyes had gleamed when he'd asked if Noah could play. Something told him this night would change everything. He just didn't know how right he was. The grandfather clock in the mansion's foyer struck 4 o'clock, its deep chimes reverberating through the halls like a countdown to doom. Noah was helping his mother arrange flowers in the dining room when Maxwell's polished shoes clicked ominously across the marble floor. "Eliza." Maxwell's voice cut through the afternoon silence like a blade. "A word." Eliza's hand stilled on the crystal vase she was positioning. Noah felt her body tense beside him the way a deer freezes when it senses danger. "Yes, Mr. Thornton?" she replied, her voice carefully neutral. Maxwell's cold gaze swept over them both, lingering on Noah with that same unsettling amusement from earlier. "I've been thinking about our little situation. Your son's unexpected presence here today." "Sir, I apologize again. It won't happen." "Oh, but it will," Maxwell interrupted, his smile sharp as broken glass. "In fact, I have the perfect solution. Tonight's guests need entertainment, and your boy claims he can play violin." The color drained from Eliza's face. "Mr. Thornton, Noah is just a child. He's never performed for important people?" Maxwell's eyebrows arched mockingly. "How limiting. Tonight he'll have the chance to expand his horizons. I want him to play for my guests during dinner. A little cultural enrichment." Noah's stomach dropped. He could hear the cruelty beneath Maxwell's polite words, could see how his mother's hands had begun to tremble. "Please," Eliza whispered, stepping protectively in front of Noah. "He's only 8 years old. This isn't appropriate." Maxwell's facade of politeness evaporated. "Appropriate?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do you know what's not appropriate, Eliza? Bringing your child to my home without permission. Letting him wander through my private study, touching my priceless possessions." "I'll take him home right now," Eliza said desperately. "Mrs. Patterson, will be better tomorrow, and this will never—" "No." The word fell like a hammer. "The boy performs tonight, or you can collect your final paycheck and never set foot in this house again." The threat hung in the air like poison. No one knew what that meant. Without this job, they couldn't afford his mother's heart medication. They'd lose their tiny room behind the laundromat. Everything would fall apart. "Mr. Thornton," Eliza's voice cracked. "Surely you understand that a child cannot what? Cannot humiliate himself in front of wealthy strangers?" Maxwell's laugh was as cold as winter rain. "That's precisely the point, my dear. My guests will be amused by the spectacle, A touching little performance by the help's son. Very democratic. Of me, don't you think? Noah felt his mother's defeat in the way her shoulders sagged. She looked down at him, her eyes filled with anguish and helpless love. I can do it, Mama, Noah whispered. Though his voice shook, he didn't understand exactly what Maxwell was planning, but he could see the trap they were caught in. See? Maxwell clapped his hands together with false cheer. The boy is eager to perform. How delightful. 8 o'clock sharp, in the main dining room. Make sure he's presentable. As Maxwell strode away, his footsteps echoing like gunshots, Eliza sank into a nearby chair and buried her face in her hands. I'm so sorry, baby, she whispered through her fingers. I'm so sorry. But Noah wasn't looking at his mother anymore. His eyes were fixed on Maxwell's retreating figure, and for the first time in his young life he felt something darker than fear burning in his chest. Tonight, Maxwell Thornton expected a humiliation. What he was going to get would be something else entirely. Noah found himself hiding in the mansion's vast library, tears streaming down his cheeks as Maxwell's cruel words echoed in his mind. The leather-bound books seemed to tower over him like silent judges, their golden spines catching the late afternoon light streaming through tall windows. He was so lost in his misery that he didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching until a gentle voice spoke behind him. Rough day, son? Noah spun around to find a tall, elderly man with kind eyes and silver hair. The man wore a simple chauffeur's uniform, but there was something dignified about his bearing, something that reminded Noah of his grandfather Samuel. I'm Victor, the man said, settling into a nearby armchair with careful grace. I drive for Mr. Thornton, and you must be Eliza's boy. Noah nodded, wiping his nose with his sleeve. I'm Noah. Victor studied him with gentle concern. I couldn't help but overhear what happened in the dining room. Maxwell's planning something unpleasant for tonight, isn't he? He wants me to play violin for his fancy guests, Noah whispered. But he expects me to fail. He wants them to laugh at me. Victor's expression darkened. That sounds like Maxwell, all right. He leaned forward, his voice growing softer. Tell me, Noah, can you actually play? Noah hesitated, then nodded slowly. My grandfather taught me a little before he died. I've been practicing on his old violin every morning. Your grandfather was a musician? Samuel Carter, Noah said with quiet pride. Mama says he was the best violinist she ever heard, but nobody would give him a chance because of the color of his skin. Victor finished gently. Noah's eyes widened in surprise at the man's understanding. Victor was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the arm of his chair. Noah, can I tell you a secret? I wasn't always a driver. I used to teach music at the Westfield Academy, one of the most prestigious music schools in the state. What happened? Noah asked, his tears forgotten. The school went under during the recession. I lost everything. My career, my reputation, even my home. Maxwell hired me when no one else would, though I suspect he enjoys having a former professor as his driver. Victor's smile was sad but not bitter. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. Victor studied Noah's face carefully. Show me your hands. Confused, Noah held out his small hands. Victor examined them with the practiced eye of someone who had taught countless students. Good finger-length, flexible joints, Victor murmured. And your grandfather's musical blood. He looked up at Noah with growing interest. How much have you really learned? Noah's voice grew stronger. I can play scales, some simple pieces. I learned grandfather's favorite song, Meditation by Massenet. I practice every morning before school using videos on the library computer. Victor's eyebrows shot up. Massenet, that's not exactly beginner material. He stood up suddenly, pacing with excitement. Noah, what if I told you that Maxwell's plan might just backfire spectacularly? What do you mean? Victor knelt down to Noah's eye level, his face serious but warm. I mean, what if instead of giving those guests the humiliation they expect, you gave them something beautiful, something real? But I'm just 8 years old, Noah protested. I'm not good enough to play for important people. Music isn't about age, son. It's about heart. And from what I can see, you've got more heart than Maxwell Thornton ever will. Victor's eyes sparkled with something Noah hadn't seen since his grandfather died. Belief. Would you? Would you help me? Noah asked, his voice barely a whisper. Victor smiled, and for the first time since arriving at the mansion, Noah felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. Son, Victor said, standing and extending his hand, I thought you'd never ask. Victor led Noah to a quiet alcove near the servants' quarters, away from Maxwell's prying eyes. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the mansion's ornate walls. Before we begin, Victor said gently, tell me more about your grandfather. Sometimes understanding where our music comes from helps us find our voice. Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small worn photograph. With trembling fingers, he handed it to Victor, who adjusted his glasses to study the image. The photograph showed a young black man in a simple suit, holding a violin with confident grace. Even in the faded sepia tones, his eyes sparkled with unmistakable passion and talent. Victor's breath caught in his throat. His hands began to shake as he stared at the photograph. Dear God, he whispered, his voice barely audible. This is the shadow. The shadow? Noah asked, confused. Victor looked up at Noah with wonder and disbelief. Son, your grandfather was a legend. In the jazz circles of the 1960s, there was a violinist they called the Shadow because he played in dimly lit clubs, often behind curtains or in corners where people couldn't see his face clearly. But musicians, real musicians, knew they would travel hundreds of miles just to hear him play. Noah's eyes widened. But grandfather never told me. He wouldn't have, Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. The Shadow was brilliant, but the world wasn't ready for a black, classical violinist to get the recognition he deserved. So he played in jazz clubs and church basements anywhere that would have him. The music community whispered about him like he was a ghost. There one night, gone the next. Victor stood up and began pacing, his excitement growing. I studied briefly under Master Chen in Philadelphia in the early 70s. He used to tell stories about a mysterious violinist who could make grown men weep with a single note. He said the Shadow played with the angels themselves. Master Chen taught you? Noah asked. For 2 summers, yes. And he mentioned that he'd worked with the Shadow years before, said it was like teaching music to music itself. Victor turned to Noah, his eyes bright with tears. Your grandfather and I learned from the same master, Noah. We're connected by more than chance. Noah felt a shiver run down his spine. Grandfather always said music was in our blood. It is, son. It absolutely is. Victor knelt down and placed his hands on Noah's shoulders. But it's more than that. Master Chen used to say that some students carry the essence of their teachers forward, like a flame passed from candle to candle. Your grandfather carried Master Chen's teachings. You carry your grandfather's gift. But I'm not like him, Noah protested. I'm just a kid who practices in a tiny room. The Shadow started as a child too, playing on a violin held together with wire and hope. Victor's voice grew stronger. Noah, what you're about to do tonight isn't just about proving Maxwell wrong. You're about to honor a legacy that was never properly recognized. Victor stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the mansion's perfectly manicured gardens. Your grandfather deserved to play in concert halls, to have his name in programs, to be celebrated for the genius he was. Instead, he played in shadows. He turned back to Noah, his face resolute. Tonight, you step out of those shadows. Tonight, you play in the light. Noah felt something shift inside him, a connection to something larger than himself, larger than this mansion, larger than Maxwell's cruelty. Will you teach me what Master Chen taught you? Noah asked. Victor smiled, and in that smile, Noah saw the reflection of his grandfather's spirit. I'll teach you everything I know, son. We have 4 hours to prepare you for the performance of your lifetime. Victor led Noah to a forgotten conservatory, tucked away in the mansion's east wing. Dust motes danced in the golden evening light streaming through tall windows, and the air smelled of old wood and forgotten dreams. "Maxwell never comes here," Victor said, carefully closing the door behind them. This room was built by the previous owner, a woman who truly loved music. In the center of the room sat a grand piano, its ebony surface dulled with neglect. But what made Noah's breath catch was the violin resting on Maxwell's desk earlier. Victor had somehow retrieved it. "How did you—" Noah began. "Maxwell's, in his wine cellar, boasting to early guests about tonight's entertainment," Victor said grimly. "He has no idea what this instrument really is." Victor lifted the violin with reverent hands. "Noah, this is a Guarneri del Gesù, made in 1734. It's worth more than most people's houses. Maxwell bought it at auction to impress visitors, but he doesn't understand its true voice." As Victor examined the instrument more closely, his expression changed. His fingers traced faint markings near the chin rest, and his eyes widened with recognition. "Impossible," he breathed. "What is it?" Noah asked. Victor's voice shook with emotion. "These markings. I've seen them before. This violin belonged to the Philadelphia Orchestra in the 1960s. They used these tiny scratches to identify instruments during tours." He looked at Noah with amazement. "Your grandfather played with the Philadelphia Orchestra briefly before they forced him out," Noah finished quietly. "Yes. Son, there's a chance, just a chance, that your grandfather's hands once held this very instrument." The coincidence felt otherworldly, as if the universe was aligning to give Samuel's legacy one final moment to shine. "Let's tune her properly," Victor said, his teacher instincts taking over. "Maxwell probably hasn't had it tuned in months." As Victor adjusted the strings, the violin began to sing with pure, crystalline tones. Noah had never heard anything so beautiful. His grandfather's old violin, beloved as it was, had limitations that this instrument simply didn't possess. "Now," Victor said, handing Noah the bow with ceremony, "show me your grandfather's massenet." Noah positioned the violin under his chin, feeling the smooth wood against his skin. When he drew the bow across the strings, the sound that emerged was transcendent, richer and more powerful than anything he'd ever produced. "Good," Victor said, but his teacher's ear caught imperfections. "But you're holding tension in your shoulder. Relax. Let the music flow through you, not fight against you." For the next 2 hours, Victor worked with Noah intensively. He showed him how to project sound in a large room, how to breathe with the music, how to let emotion guide technique rather than the other way around. "Remember," Victor said as they practiced, "you're not performing for Maxwell or his guests. You're having a conversation with your grandfather. Let him guide your bow." Meanwhile, in the main dining room, Maxwell was indeed entertaining his early arrivals with cruel anticipation of the evening's surprise entertainment. The wealthy guests laughed at his descriptions of the little servant boy, who thought he could play for sophisticated company, but in the forgotten conservatory, something magical was happening. With each passing minute, Noah's playing grew more confident, more connected to something deeper than technique. "One more time," Victor said as the clock struck 7. "But this time, close your eyes. Don't think about the notes on the page. Think about your grandfather's hands, his heart, his dreams that were never fulfilled." Noah closed his eyes and began to play. The melody that emerged was haunting, beautiful, and filled with a maturity that seemed impossible from someone so young. When he finished, Victor wiped tears from his eyes. "Noah," he said quietly, "you're ready. Tonight, the shadow finally gets his moment in the light." From the main hall, they could hear Maxwell's voice calling for the evening's festivities to begin. It was time. The main dining room of the Thornton mansion had been transformed into a showcase of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across polished mahogany, while arrangements of rare orchids perfumed the air with exotic sweetness. Maxwell moved through his guests like a predator surveying his territory, his chest puffed with arrogant pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maxwell announced, raising his glass of vintage champagne, Tonight promises to be particularly memorable. Among the distinguished guests, two figures stood apart from the rest. Isabella Reynolds, the renowned conductor of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, carried herself with quiet dignity. Her silver hair was elegantly arranged, and her sharp eyes missed nothing as she observed Maxwell's behavior with growing distaste. Beside her stood James Harrington, the most influential classical music critic on the East Coast. His reviews could make or break careers, and his presence at Maxwell's dinner was considered a significant social coup. "Maxwell," Isabella said coolly as their host approached, "you mentioned special entertainment tonight. I do hope it's not another one of your amateur tenor friends." Maxwell's smile turned predatory. "Oh, Isabella, this will be far more amusing than that. We'll be treated to a performance by a genuine prodigy." He nearly choked on the word, his eyes gleaming with malicious anticipation. "A prodigy?" James raised an eyebrow. "How intriguing. Anyone we might know?" "I doubt it," Maxwell replied with a laugh that made several guests uncomfortable. "He's quite undiscovered, the son of one of my staff members. 8 years old, believes. He can play violin for sophisticated company." Isabella's expression hardened. "You're planning to humiliate a child for entertainment?" "I'm providing an opportunity," Maxwell said smoothly. "If the boy has talent, surely he'll shine. If not—" He shrugged with mock sympathy. "Well, it's better he learns his limitations now, don't you think?" The other guests, a mix of wealthy, investors, socialites, and cultural figures, exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable with Maxwell's obvious setup, while others seemed eager for the spectacle. In the kitchen, Eliza worked frantically to serve the elaborate meal, her hands shaking as she arranged delicate canapes on silver trays. Every few minutes she glanced toward the dining room, her heart breaking at the thought of what her son was about to face. "Mrs. Carter?" A young server named Maria touched Eliza's arm gently. "Your boy. He's been practicing with Mr. Victor. I heard music coming from the old conservatory. Beautiful music." Eliza's eyes filled with hope and terror in equal measure. "Victor's helping him?" "Yes, ma'am, and I think you should know. The music I heard. It didn't sound like child's play." Meanwhile, Maxwell continued his verbal assault on Noah's chances, each word calculated to build expectations for the boys. "Failure. The violin he'll be using," Maxwell announced to his fascinated audience, "is actually a rather valuable piece from my collection. I thought it only fitting that he attempt to play something worthy of the instrument." His laugh was cold as winter wind. "Though I suspect the violin will survive the experience better than the boy's pride." Isabella set down her champagne glass with enough force to make it ring against the table. "Maxwell, this is cruel, even for you." "Cruel?" Maxwell's eyebrows shot up in mock innocence. "I'm giving an underprivileged child the chance of a lifetime. How many 8-year-olds get to perform for such distinguished company? You're setting him up to fail," James observed quietly. "What kind of man finds joy in a child's humiliation?" Maxwell's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something darker underneath. The kind of man who understands that people need to know their place in the world, better to learn it young. The room fell into uncomfortable silence, broken only by the soft clinking of silverware against fine china. Even the most cynical guests began to sense that they were about to witness something that would leave them all diminished. In the conservatory, Noah was putting the Guarneri violin carefully into its case, his small hands steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. "Remember," Victor said quietly, "you're not just Noah Carter tonight. You're Samuel's grandson. You carry his music, his dreams, his unfinished song." The sound of Maxwell's voice calling for the entertainment echoed through the mansion's halls, sharp and expectant. It was time for the Shadow's grandson to step into the light. Noah stood outside the dining room's grand double doors, the Guarneri violin case clutched in his trembling hands. Through the ornate glass panels, he could see the elegant guests seated around Maxwell's massive table, their faces blurred but intimidating in their sophisticated indifference. His heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. The weight of the moment crashed over him. These weren't the kind neighbors who sometimes listened to him practice in Mrs. Chen's laundromat. These were people who belonged to a world where 8-year-old boys like him were invisible, except when they served as entertainment. Panic rose in his throat like bile. What had he been thinking? Victor's encouragement felt like a distant dream now, overwhelmed by the reality of what he was about to attempt. Noah stumbled toward the nearest bathroom, his legs weak and unsteady. The opulent powder room felt like a golden cage, with its marble countertops and mirrors that reflected his fear back at him from every angle. He sank onto the velvet-cushioned chair in the corner and buried his face in his hands, hot tears streaming between his fingers. "I can't do this," he whispered to himself. "I'm just a kid. I'm nobody special." The voices from the dining room drifted through the walls, Maxwell's booming laughter, the cultured tones of his guests discussing art and politics with casual confidence. How could he possibly face these people? How could he stand before them with his second-hand clothes and his grandmother's mended violin technique? "Grandfather," Noah whispered desperately, looking up at his reflection in the ornate mirror. "I don't know how to do this. They're going to laugh at me. They're going to hurt Mama's feelings, and it'll be all my fault." The bathroom door opened softly, and Eliza stepped inside. Her face was pale with worry, but when she saw her son's tears, her expression transformed into something fierce and protective. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, kneeling beside him and pulling him into her arms. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. We don't have to do this. We can leave right now." "But your job," Noah started. "Jobs can be replaced," Eliza said firmly, though Noah could hear the fear in her voice. "You are irreplaceable." For a moment they held each other in the golden bathroom while the sounds of wealth and privilege echoed around them. Then Eliza pulled back and looked into her son's eyes. "Noah," she said quietly, "there's something I never told you about your grandfather. Something he made me promise to save for the right moment." Noah wiped his nose with his sleeve, listening intently. "The night before he died, he called me to his bedside. He was so weak, but his eyes were bright and clear." Eliza's voice grew soft with memory. He said, "The music didn't skip you, Eliza. It went deeper. It went to Noah, and when he's ready, it will flow like a river that's been waiting behind a dam." She touched Noah's face gently. "He said that someday, you would play not just for yourself, but for everyone who had been silenced, for every dream that was crushed before it could bloom." Noah felt something shift inside him like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known existed. He really said that? Every word. Eliza smiled through her tears. And he said something else. He said, "When that moment comes, Noah won't be playing alone. Every musician who was never heard, every song that was never sung, they'll all be there with him." Noah stood up slowly, his fear transforming into something else. Not confidence exactly, but purpose. "Mama," he said quietly, "I think I understand now. This isn't about impressing those people out there. What is it about, baby?" Noah picked up the violin case, his hands steady now. "It's about keeping a promise, to grandfather, to all the musicians who never got their chance." Eliza's eyes filled with pride and terror in equal measure as she watched her little boy become something larger than himself. "Then go keep that promise, sweetheart. And remember, no matter what happens out there, you are loved." As Noah and Eliza emerged from the powder room, they found Victor waiting in the hallway, his weathered face etched with concern and understanding. He had watched countless students face their fears over the decades, but never had the stakes felt quite so personal. "How are we doing, son?" Victor asked gently, though he could see the transformation in Noah's posture. The boy stood straighter now, his grip on the violin case firm rather than desperate. "I think I'm ready," Noah said, his voice small but steady. "Mama told me what grandfather said about playing for those who were silenced." Victor's eyes grew bright with emotion. Ah, yes, the weight of representation. He knelt down to Noah's eye level, his voice taking on the cadence of a master teacher imparting crucial wisdom. "But let me tell you something Master Chen taught. Me long ago, something I never fully understood until tonight. He placed his hands gently on Noah's shoulders. When you walk into that room, you'll see people in expensive clothes dripping with jewelry sitting at a table that costs more than most cars. It's easy to think they're better than you, more important than you. Noah nodded, still feeling that intimidation despite his newfound resolve. But here's the secret, Victor continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. Music is the great equalizer. The moment you draw that bow across those strings, none of their money matters. None of their titles or status or fancy educations matter. In that moment, you become the most powerful person in the room. How? Noah asked. Victor smiled, and for a moment the former professor emerged fully. Because music speaks to the soul, Noah. It bypasses all the artificial barriers humans create and goes straight to what makes us human. A billionaire's heart beats with the same rhythm as a child's. A society matron's tears fall just as wet as anyone else's. Eliza watched this exchange with growing amazement, seeing her son absorb wisdom that would serve him far beyond this single night. Your grandfather knew this, Victor continued. When he played in those dimly lit clubs, he wasn't performing for the room. He was speaking directly to each person's hidden heart. The businessman who'd forgotten how to feel wonder, the society wife who'd lost touch with her dreams, the young person afraid to believe in their own potential. Victor stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the mansion's perfectly manicured grounds. Master Chen used to say that technique is just the language, but the music itself is the message, and the message is always the same. You are not alone. You are understood. You matter. But what if I make mistakes? Noah asked. Then, you make them beautifully, Victor replied without hesitation. Perfection is cold, Noah. It's the imperfections, the human moments that make music breathe. Your grandfather's playing was legendary not because it was flawless, but because it was real. Victor turned back to face Noah and Eliza, his expression serious but warm. Tonight, don't play for Maxwell or his guests. Don't even play for your grandfather's memory, though his spirit will be with you. Then who do I play for? Noah asked. Play for the music itself, Victor said simply. Let it flow through you like water through a riverbed. Don't try to control it or shape it or make it impressive, just let it be what it wants to be. From the dining room came the sound of Maxwell's voice, calling for the evening's entertainment to begin. The moment had arrived. Victor knelt once more and looked directly into Noah's eyes. Remember, son, you're not going in there as a servant's child or as someone who needs to prove anything. You're going in there as a musician. And musicians, he smiled with quiet pride, are the memory keepers of the human heart. Noah felt the truth of those words settle into his bones like warm honey. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in control. Thank you, Noah said simply. No, Victor replied, standing and gesturing toward the dining room. Thank you. Tonight you're giving us all a gift. Now go share it. As they walked toward the double doors, Noah could hear his grandfather's voice in his memory, as clear as if Samuel were walking beside him. Music lives in our blood, Noah. Don't let anyone tell you different. Tonight he wouldn't. As Noah approached the dining room entrance, Maxwell's voice boomed with theatrical grandeur, introducing his special surprise to the assembled guests. But Victor suddenly placed a gentle hand on Noah's shoulder, stopping him just outside the ornate doors. Wait, Victor whispered urgently. There's something else about that violin. Something I discovered while you were with your mother. Noah looked up at the older man, seeing an expression of wonder mixed with disbelief on Victor's weathered face. I examined the instrument more closely while you were gone, Victor continued, his voice trembling with emotion. Inside the sound hole, there's an inscription. Very faint, almost invisible unless you know where to look. Victor's hands shook as he carefully opened Noah's violin case and lifted the magnificent Guarneri. He angled it toward the hallway light and pointed to tiny markings barely visible through the F-hole. Can you see it? Victor asked. There, scratched into the wood. Noah squinted and could just make out the faintest etching. S.C. For the music that lives forever. The boy's breath caught in his throat. S.C. Samuel Carter? Your grandfather, Victor confirmed, his voice thick with amazement. Noah, this isn't just any Guarneri. This is the violin your grandfather played during his brief time with the Philadelphia Orchestra. Somehow, impossibly, it found its way to Maxwell's collection. The weight of destiny settled over Noah like a warm cloak. It seemed impossible that chance alone could have brought his grandfather's instrument back into his hands on this crucial night. But how did Maxwell get it? Noah whispered. Victor's expression darkened. Estate auctions, probably. When musicians like your grandfather died without proper recognition, their instruments often ended up sold to collectors who cared nothing for their history. Maxwell likely bought it for the prestige of owning a Guarneri, never knowing whose hands had once brought it to life. Through the dining room doors, they could hear Maxwell's voice growing more animated as he built up the evening's entertainment, his words dripping with anticipated cruelty. This changes everything, Victor said quietly. You're not just playing for your grandfather's memory tonight, Noah. You're reuniting him with his voice. This violin has been silent for years, waiting for the right hands to awaken its true song again. Noah felt a strange tingling in his fingertips as he touched the instrument's neck. It was as if the violin recognized him, welcoming him home after a long separation. Can you feel it? Victor asked, watching Noah's expression with the keen eye of someone who understood the mystical bond between musician and instrument. Noah nodded slowly. It feels alive, like it's been sleeping and just woke up. That's exactly what's happening, Victor said with certainty. Great instruments have memory, Noah. They remember every song they've played, every emotion they've channeled. This violin remembers your grandfather's touch, his passion, his dreams. From beyond the doors came the sound of chairs scraping and quiet conversation as Maxwell's guests prepared for the show they expected to be a humiliation. One more thing, Victor said, his voice urgent but calm. When you play tonight, don't think of it as performing for strangers. Think of it as having a conversation with your grandfather through his violin. Let the instrument guide you. Trust its memory. Noah lifted the violin to his chin for a moment, feeling the smooth wood settle against his collarbone with an almost supernatural familiarity. Even without drawing the bow, he could sense the power sleeping within the strings. He's really going to be there with me, isn't he? Noah asked. In every note, Victor assured him. And Noah, your grandfather waited 40 years for this moment. Don't let him wait any longer. The doors to the dining room swung open, and Maxwell's commanding voice called out, Ladies and gentlemen, may I present our evening's entertainment, young Noah Carter. As Noah stepped forward into the light, carrying his grandfather's violin toward a room full of expectant strangers, he felt the presence of every musician who had ever been denied their moment to shine. Tonight, they would all be heard. The dining room fell into an expectant hush as Noah stepped through the doorway, his small figure dwarfed by the cathedral-high ceilings and glittering chandeliers. The Guarneri violin case seemed to glow under the crystal lights, and every eye in the room fixed upon the 8-year-old boy who stood at the threshold of destiny. Maxwell rose from his seat at the head of the massive mahogany table, his face radiating the smug satisfaction of a predator about to feast. The room had been transformed into an impromptu concert hall, with guests arranged in a semicircle that felt more like a tribunal than an audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Maxwell announced with theatrical flourish, may I present the son of one of my household staff, who believes he possesses the talent to entertain such distinguished company as yourselves. Several guests shifted uncomfortably at Maxwell's obvious setup, while others leaned forward with the morbid curiosity of spectators at a gladiatorial contest. Isabella Reynolds sat rigid in her chair, her conductor's instincts already telling her that something was deeply wrong with this entire scenario. Beside her, James Harrington adjusted his glasses and studied Noah with the sharp eye of someone who had witnessed countless performances, both triumphant and tragic. The boy will be playing on one of my finest instruments, Maxwell continued, gesturing grandly toward Noah's violin case. A genuine Guarneri del Gesù, worth more than most of you earn in a year. I thought it only fitting that he attempt to rise to the level of such craftsmanship. Noah felt the weight of every gaze upon him, but instead of crumbling under the pressure, he found himself drawing strength from the violin case in his hands. He could almost feel his grandfather's presence, steady and reassuring, flowing through the instrument that had once given voice to Samuel's unrecognized genius. "Please, young man," Maxwell said with exaggerated courtesy, "do take your position. We're all quite eager to hear what you've prepared for us." The designated performance area was a small clearing near the room's grand fireplace, where Noah would stand exposed and vulnerable before the assembled wealth and power. As he walked toward it, his footsteps seemed unnaturally loud on the polished marble floor. Victor appeared in the servants' entrance, his face carefully neutral but his eyes burning with protective intensity. Eliza stood beside him, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Both of them radiated silent support toward Noah, their love forming an invisible shield around the boy. "Take all the time you need to prepare," Maxwell said magnanimously, though his tone made it clear that any delay would only add to the eventual humiliation. "We understand that this might be overwhelming for someone so young and inexperienced." Noah carefully opened the violin case, and a subtle gasp rippled through the room as the magnificent Guarneri was revealed. Even those guests who knew nothing about music could recognize the instrument's obvious value and craftsmanship. But Noah saw something they couldn't. He saw his grandfather's violin, returned to him across the years like a miracle. As he lifted the instrument from its velvet-lined case, he could swear he felt Samuel's weathered hands guiding his own. Isabella leaned forward in her chair, her trained eye immediately recognizing something special about the way Noah handled the violin. There was a reverence in his touch, a natural understanding that couldn't be taught or faked. "Whenever you're ready," Maxwell called out, settling back into his chair like a Roman emperor about to watch Christians face the lions. Noah positioned the violin under his chin, feeling the familiar weight of the chin rest against his collarbone. The room seemed to hold its breath as he raised the bow, every person present sensing that they were about to witness something significant, though few understood exactly what. In that moment of perfect silence, Noah closed his eyes and whispered, something too quiet for anyone else to hear, "This is for you, grandfather. Let them hear your voice." The bow touched the strings and the first note rose into the air like a prayer seeking heaven. The transformation began immediately. The first notes of Massenet's meditation emerged from the Guarneri with tentative grace, like a bird testing its wings after a long winter. Noah's initial strokes were careful, almost hesitant, and several guests exchanged knowing glances. This was exactly what they had expected from a child attempting to play far above his station. Maxwell's smile widened as he settled deeper into his chair, already savoring the impending collapse of the boy's confidence. A few guests barely suppressed snickers, their faces showing the cruel anticipation of watching someone fail spectacularly. But then something extraordinary began to happen. As Noah's bow found its rhythm across the strings, the hesitation melted, away like morning frost under sunlight. The violin seemed to awaken in his hands, responding to his touch with an increasingly rich, pure tone that filled the dining room with unexpected beauty. Isabella Reynolds straightened in her chair, her trained ear immediately recognizing that what she was hearing defied every expectation. This wasn't the fumbling attempt of an amateur child. This was music being born from genuine emotion and surprising skill. The melody began to soar, each note flowing into the next with a fluidity that spoke of countless hours of secret practice and natural talent. Noah's eyes remained closed, his small frame swaying gently with the music as if he were channeling something far larger than himself. Maxwell's confident smirk began to falter. The sounds emerging from his dining room weren't the screeching failure he had orchestrated. They were hauntingly beautiful, filled with a depth of feeling that seemed impossible from someone so young. James Harrington leaned forward, his critical faculties fully engaged. In 30 years of reviewing performances, he had learned to distinguish between technical competence and true musical expression. What he was witnessing fell clearly into the latter category. The room began to transform around Noah's performance. Conversations died mid-sentence. Silverware was quietly set down. Even the most cynical guests found themselves drawn into the spell of the music, their expectations crumbling before the reality of what they were experiencing. Eliza stood frozen, in the servants' entrance, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son honor his grandfather's memory with every soaring phrase. Victor beside her nodded slowly, recognizing the fulfillment of everything he had hoped for during their afternoon of preparation, but Noah himself was lost in a world beyond the dining room. In his mind, he stood in a dimly lit jazz club from decades past, playing alongside his grandfather Samuel. He could feel the shadow's presence guiding his fingers, teaching him to find the spaces between notes where emotion lived. The violin sang with increasing power and confidence, its voice carrying not just the melody but the accumulated dreams of every musician who had been silenced or overlooked. The instrument seemed to remember its own history, channeling the passion of its previous owner through Noah's young hands. Maxwell's face had gone pale. This wasn't supposed to happen. The boy was supposed to fail, to provide amusing entertainment for his guests. Instead, he was creating something that made Maxwell feel small and crude by comparison. Isabella found herself wiping away tears she hadn't expected to shed. The performance was more than technically proficient. It was transcendent, carrying the kind of emotional truth that she spent her career trying to coax from professional musicians. As Noah approached the piece's climactic passages, his playing reached new heights of expression. The room seemed to hold its breath, every person present sensing they were witnessing something rare and precious. The final notes hung in the air like golden light, slowly fading into a silence that seemed sacred. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The spell of the music held them all in its grip. Then, like a dam bursting, the silence shattered into thunderous applause. Isabella shot to her feet, her hands coming together in appreciation that was both professional and deeply personal. James Harrington was already reaching for his phone, his critic's instincts telling him he had just witnessed something newsworthy. But Maxwell sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of shock and growing fury. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to end. This was only the beginning. The applause continued to thunder through the dining room, but Maxwell Thornton sat motionless, his face a mask of disbelief and mounting rage. This wasn't the humiliation he had orchestrated. This was his own public defeat at the hands of an 8-year-old boy. Isabella Reynolds moved swiftly toward Noah, her years of experience with young talent immediately taking over. "Young man," she said, kneeling to his eye level, "that was extraordinary. Where did you learn to play with such feeling?" "My grandfather taught me," Noah replied quietly, still holding the guarneri with reverent care. "He said music lives in our blood." James Harrington was already on his phone, speaking in urgent whispers to his editor. "You need to hold the front page," he said. "I've just witnessed something remarkable. A child prodigy, but more than that, a genuine artist." Maxwell finally found his voice, standing abruptly and trying to regain control of his derailed evening. "Well, that was adequate," he said with forced dismissiveness. "Though I hardly think one simple piece demonstrates any real—" "Are you insane?" Isabella cut him off, her voice sharp with outrage. She turned to face Maxwell fully, her petite frame radiating authority. "That child just delivered one of the most moving performances I've heard in years, and you're calling it adequate?" The other guests began to murmur among themselves, their attitudes toward the evening shifting dramatically. What had begun as anticipated cruelty had transformed into something beautiful, and Maxwell's callous response was revealing his true character in the worst possible light. "Really, Isabella," Maxwell said, his tone growing desperate, "you're being overly dramatic. The boy played a simple piece with minimal training. Hardly worthy of such minimal training?" James Harrington stepped forward, his critic's instincts fully engaged. "Mr. Thornton, I've reviewed performances by graduates of Juilliard who couldn't convey half the emotion this child just expressed. His technique may be young, but his musical understanding is profound." Maxwell's face reddened, as he realized his carefully constructed social evening was crumbling around him. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're all being fooled by sentimentality. The boy is nothing special, just the son of hired help who got lucky tonight." The words hung in the air like poison, and several guests recoiled visibly from Maxwell's ugly display. Dr. Patricia Westbrook, a prominent philanthropist, stood and placed her napkin on the table with deliberate precision. "Maxwell," she said coldly, "your behavior tonight has been absolutely disgraceful. Attempting to humiliate a child for entertainment? I'm appalled." "Patricia, you're overreacting," Maxwell began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "I'm withdrawing my foundation's support from your charitable ventures," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We don't associate with people who find cruelty amusing." A ripple of shocked whispers spread through the room. Dr. Westbrook's foundation was worth millions in donations and social credibility. Robert Manchester, one of Maxwell's potential business partners, was already standing to leave. "I'm sorry, Maxwell, but after witnessing this display, I'm having second thoughts about our proposed merger. Character matters in business relationships." Maxwell watched in horror as his evening of triumph transformed into social suicide. Guest after guest began making their excuses, their disgust with his behavior overriding any social obligations they might have felt. "You're all making a terrible mistake," Maxwell said desperately. "The boy's performance was nothing more than a fluke. A momentary. The only mistake here," Isabella said with icy precision, "was yours, Maxwell. You tried to orchestrate the humiliation of a gifted child, and instead you've revealed the poverty of your own character." She turned to Noah with gentle warmth. "Young man, would you be interested in auditioning for our youth development program? I believe you have extraordinary potential." Noah's eyes widened with wonder, but before he could respond, James Harrington stepped forward. "I'd like to write a feature about you for the Times," he said. "The world should know about your talent, and about how it was discovered." Maxwell's face went ashen as he realized the implications. A major newspaper feature about the evening would spread far beyond these walls, carrying the story of his cruelty to a much wider audience. "Now wait just a minute," Maxwell said, his voice cracking with panic. "There's no need to involve the press in a private dinner party." "Oh, but there is," James replied with the cold smile of a journalist who had found the perfect story. "The public has a right to know about emerging talent, and about those who try to suppress it." Victor appeared at Noah's side, pride radiating from his weathered face. "Come on, son," he said gently. "I think it's time we got you and your mother home." As they prepared to leave, Maxwell made one last desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. "This is all a misunderstanding," he called out to his departing guests. "I was simply providing an opportunity, but the dining room was already half empty, and those who remained looked at him with undisguised contempt. The empire Maxwell had, built on cruelty and exploitation, was crumbling, one departing guest at a time. 3 weeks after that transformative evening at the Thornton Mansion, the world had shifted on its axis for everyone involved. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Isabella Reynolds's elegant office at the Westfield Academy of Music, where she sat across from Eliza and Noah, official documents spread across her mahogany desk. "The scholarship covers everything," Isabella explained warmly, her voice filled with genuine excitement. "Tuition, room, and board for both of you, and access to our finest instructors. Noah will work with Master Chen's successor, who trained at the same conservatory in Philadelphia where your father once studied." Eliza's hands trembled as she signed the papers that would change their lives forever. Gone were the days of working 3 jobs and worrying about medical bills. The academy had not only offered Noah a full scholarship, but had created a position for Eliza in their administration, complete with health benefits and housing in the faculty quarters. "I still can't believe this is real," Eliza whispered, tears of gratitude flowing freely. Meanwhile, across town, Maxwell Thornton sat in his lawyer's office, surrounded by a growing mountain of legal troubles. The newspaper article about Noah's story had triggered an avalanche of investigations into Maxwell's business practices. Former employees had come forward with tales of mistreatment, and several of his companies were now under federal scrutiny. "The Montgomery Group has withdrawn their investment," his lawyer reported grimly. "That's the 3rd major partner this week. The Patterson Foundation is also reviewing their endowment to your museum wing. Maxwell stared out the window at the city skyline, watching his empire crumble just as Victor had anonymously provided. Authorities with evidence of labor violations and financial irregularities that had been hidden for years. Back at the academy, Victor had found new purpose as well. Isabella had offered him a position as instructor emeritus, recognizing his decades of experience and his unique connection to Noah's musical heritage. "The boy has remarkable instinct," Victor told Isabella as they watched Noah practice in one of the academy's beautiful rehearsal rooms. "But more than that, he carries something special, a connection to the music that can't be taught." Through the soundproof glass, they could see Noah working with his new violin, not the Geniu, which had been rightfully returned to Maxwell's collection, but a beautiful modern instrument that Isabella had personally selected for him. The music that flowed from the room was pure joy, the sound of talent finally free to flourish. James Harrington's feature article had been picked up by news outlets across the country, turning Noah into something of a sensation. But Isabella had carefully protected the family's privacy, ensuring that any media attention focused on Noah's talent rather than exploiting his story. "3 record labels have already called," Isabella told Eliza during their meeting. "But I've told them all the same thing. Noah is 8 years old. He needs time to grow and learn, not to be turned into a commodity." The academy had become Noah's sanctuary, a place where his gift was nurtured rather than exploited. In the faculty dining room, professors would pause their conversations when Noah passed by, not because he was a curiosity, but because he radiated the pure love of music that reminded them why they had chosen their profession. Dr. Patricia Westbrook had personally funded a new scholarship program in Noah's honor, designed to seek out and support talented children from underprivileged backgrounds. "Every child deserves the chance to let their light shine," she had announced at the program's launch. As the weeks passed, Maxwell's isolation grew complete. Former friends avoided his calls, business associates distanced themselves, and the society pages that once celebrated his gatherings now ignored him entirely. The mansion felt empty and cold, its opulent rooms echoing with the memory of a performance that had exposed the poverty of his character. One evening, Victor made an unexpected visit to the mansion. He found Maxwell sitting alone in his study, staring at the empty violin stand where the Guarneri once rested. "She's gone," Maxwell said without looking up. "Sold it yesterday to pay legal fees." Victor felt no satisfaction in seeing his former employer's downfall. "You could have been part of something beautiful that night," he said quietly. "Instead, you chose cruelty." Maxwell finally looked up, his face aged by weeks of stress and public humiliation. "I don't understand what happened. How did that boy?" "Did what you never learned to do," Victor replied. He listened to his heart instead of his pride. As Victor left the mansion for the final time, he carried with him the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes justice did prevail. Behind him, Maxwell sat alone with his expensive possessions and empty life, while across town, Noah's laughter echoed through the halls of the academy as he raced to his next music lesson. The boy who had been meant for humiliation had instead become a beacon of hope, proving that talent and character would always triumph over wealth and cruelty. 1 year later, the Westfield Academy's concert hall buzzed with anticipation as families and faculty gathered for the annual spring recital. Noah, now 9 years, old and glowing with confidence, stood backstage in his crisp white shirt and bow tie, carefully tuning a violin that held special significance. Isabella had managed the impossible. She had tracked down and purchased Samuel Carter's original violin from the pawn shop, where it had languished for years. Restored to its former glory, the instrument had been presented to Noah on his 9th birthday, completing a circle that had begun decades earlier. "Ready, sweetheart?" Eliza asked, adjusting Noah's bow tie with gentle hands. She looked radiant in her new life, her health improved by proper medical care and the absence of crushing financial stress. "I'm ready, Mama," Noah replied, his voice steady and sure. In the year since that fateful evening at Maxwell's mansion, he had grown not just as a musician, but as a young man who understood the responsibility that came with his gift. Victor appeared in the wings, resplendent in his professor's formal attire, a position that had restored his dignity and purpose. "Your grandfather would be so proud," he told Noah, placing a supportive hand on the boy's shoulder. The curtain rose, and Noah walked onto the stage to warm applause. In the audience, he could see the faces that had become his new family. Isabella beaming from the front row, his fellow students cheering him on, and professors who had nurtured his talent with patience and wisdom. But tonight's performance was about more than showcasing his growth as a musician. Tonight was about honoring a promise. "Ladies and gentlemen," Noah said, his clear voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "I'd like to dedicate tonight's performance to my grandfather, Samuel Carter, and to all the musicians whose voices were silenced, but whose songs live on in our hearts." As he raised the violin to his chin, his grandfather's violin finally home, Noah began to play the Massenet meditation that had changed everything a year ago. But this time, the music carried new depth, new understanding, and a maturity that came from a year of proper training and emotional growth. The audience sat transfixed as Noah's playing soared through the concert hall. This wasn't the hesitant performance of a child trying to prove himself. This was an artist sharing his soul with the world. In the back of the hall, unnoticed by the audience, a maintenance worker paused in his duties to listen. He was older, now wearing a simple uniform instead of expensive suits, but his face was unmistakable. Maxwell Thornton, reduced to janitorial work after losing everything, stood frozen as the music washed over him. For the first time in his life, Maxwell truly heard what he had tried to destroy that night in his dining room. As Noah's violin sang with pure emotion, Maxwell felt something crack inside his chest. The first genuine feeling he had experienced in years. When the final note faded into reverent silence, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. But Noah's eyes were drawn to something else, a movement near the back of the hall where Maxwell quietly slipped out into the night, tears streaming down his face. After the concert, the Carter family made their traditional visit to Riverside Cemetery. The sun was setting as they approached Samuel's grave, where a new headstone now stood. Through Isabella's efforts and a grant from Dr. Westbrook's foundation, Samuel Carter was finally properly memorialized. Samuel the Shadow Carter, a master musician whose light now shines through the generations. Noah sat on the grass beside the grave and began to play softly, his grandfather's violin singing a gentle melody into the evening air. Eliza and Victor stood nearby, their hearts full as they watched the boy honor the man who had made it all possible. "Can you hear him, grandfather?" Noah whispered as he played. "Can you hear the music we're making together?" A gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead, and for a moment, it seemed to carry the faint echo of another violin, harmonizing with Noah's in perfect unity. As the stars appeared overhead, Noah played one final note that seemed to hang in the air like a blessing. The Shadow's grandson had stepped fully into the light, carrying forward a legacy of music, courage, and the unshakable belief that every voice deserves to be heard. In the distance, a lone figure watched from behind a tree. Maxwell, changed by the music he had once tried to mock, beginning his own long journey toward redemption. The music lived on, as it always had, as it always would. Your old millionaire tries to embarrass his maid's 8-year-old son by forcing him to play the violin at a dinner, not knowing the boy is a genius.